The Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP27, held in Sharm el-Sheikh, continues to resonate widely in various international media, and the most important media coverage was on the 11th day of the summit by international media and social media applications, according to what was monitored by the report. The daily media, prepared by the State Information Service, is the arrival of the elected Brazilian president, Lula da Silva, to Sharm el-Sheikh, in response to President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's invitation for him to attend the COP27 climate summit, and to start negotiations on the first draft of the COP27 agreement. Also, the demand to adhere to the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius in the final declaration of the conference as one of the main gains of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change 2025, and the Egyptian presidency of the conference and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations FAO to launch the FAST initiative, which aims to make agri-food systems more sustainable in the face of climate change. Egypt and a number of developers signed agreements worth $83 billion in the renewable energy sector, and the issue of electrical interconnection between Greece and Egypt, as a new corridor for the exchange of clean energy between Europe and North Africa through the installation of a direct current cable with a voltage of 500 kilovolts with a total capacity of 3 gigawatts. According to the report, it was noted that the media coverage of the climate conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, during the 11th day of work, focused on the following issues. 1. Starting negotiations on the first draft of the COP27 agreement, and calling for adherence to the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal in the final declaration of the conference as one of the main gains of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change 2025. 2. The arrival of the elected Brazilian President Lula da Silva to Sharm el-Sheikh, in response to President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's invitation for him to attend the climate summit COP27. 3. The Egyptian presidency of the conference and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations FAO launched the FAST initiative, which aims to make agricultural food systems more sustainable in the face of climate change. For Egypt, represented by the Ministry of Planning and the Sovereign Fund of Egypt, signed a number of agreements between the fund and a number of developers, with a value of $83 billion in the renewable energy sector. 5. The issue of electrical interconnection between Greece and Egypt as a new corridor for the exchange of clean energy between Europe and North Africa, through the installation of a direct current cable with a voltage of 500 kilovolts, with a total capacity of 3 gigawatts. 6. The issue of compensation for losses for developing countries most vulnerable to the risks of climate change, and the need to fulfill the commitments of the West to provide $100 billion annually for adaptation, and the demand for the launch of a special fund to deal with losses and damages. 7. Talking about the Global Shield Plan that will provide financing and insurance for poor countries affected by floods, droughts, or other disasters related to climate change. 8. The European Union pledged to further reduce carbon emissions to 27% by 2030, compared to the current 55%. In the details of this, the SIS report indicated the continued interest of many American, Canadian, and Latin media, issued in Argentina and Cuba, in following up the work of the COP27 summit in Sharm el-Sheikh on the 11th day of it, as the media in Latin America, Cuba/Argentina, highlighted the connection the phone call made yesterday by the elected Brazilian president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, to President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and the Cuban news agency Prensa Latina pointed out that the phone call focused on strengthening economic and trade relations between the two countries, and that both leaders exchanged views on issues of common concern, including cooperation in various fields, as well as measures to strengthen the fight against climate change, according to the statement of the Egyptian presidency. Prensa Latina explained that Lula da Silva will deliver his speech today in the Blue Zone of the United Nations, and will focus in his speech on the environment and combating hunger, which is one of his top priorities in his third presidential term. There are high expectations that he will make important announcements at the conference, which is attracting the world's attention. The Argentine newspaper La Nación was concerned with the arrival of the elected Brazilian president, Lula da Silva, to Sharm el-Sheikh, in response to President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's invitation for him to attend the COP27 climate summit, which is being hosted by Egypt after the Brazilian president's victory in his country's presidential elections. The newspaper expected active participation and prominent for Brazil under the new leadership, with reference to the upcoming meeting of the Brazilian president with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Against the backdrop of U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Egypt to participate in the Global Climate Summit, the Middle East Institute in Washington noted that the main event in Biden's visit was alongside his speech at the climate conference, which highlighted America's leadership and the steps taken by his administration to address the climate crisis in inside and out, is his meeting with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, where the two leaders discussed a wide range of issues, and regarding cooperation between Egypt and the United States, the U.S. Embassy in Cairo announced research grants focused on climate action from the United States to Egypt under the U.S.-Egyptian Fund. The Joint Conference for Science and Technology, on the sidelines of the 27th session of the Conference of the States Parties to the Convention of Nations. And the American U.S. News website, quoting Reuters, pointed to what it described as major sticking points for the slow climate crisis talks at COP27, which indicates the difficulty of negotiations amid attempts to find common ground to reach an agreement at the summit. The annual atmosphere of the United Nations currently being held in Sharm el-Sheikh on major issues, highlighting the assertion of Egypt, the host country, that the slow-moving talks are still on the right track, and the Egyptian presidency of the conference seeks to heal the rift and points of contention in the directions of the negotiators. While the Argentine Infobay website noted expectations that the presidency of the current climate conference will reach a satisfactory result of the negotiations on the loss and damage file, at a time when the Paraguayan newspaper ABC and the Cuban news agency Prensa Latina indicated that Guatemala and Cuba, they are calling for funding, justice and solidarity to confront climate change at the climate summit in Egypt, while the Mexican newspaper Excelsior highlighted Mexico's affirmation of its commitment to confronting climate change at the COP27 conference. As for the European media, the information report stated that the majority of the European media shed light on the start of the difficult process of reaching a final agreement at the end of the conference, after Egypt presented an initial draft consisting of 2 pages containing clauses for the COP27 agreement, which is the issue that many German media focused on. The website of the German news agency dpa and the newspaper's main post, RNZ, Wirtschaftswoche, published reports indicating that the World Climate Summit in Egypt has become a difficult test in order to reach an ambitious final declaration. Agence France-Presse published a detailed report on this, in which it focused on asking developing countries to create a special mechanism to finance the losses and damages they suffered as a result of the repercussions of climate warming. In this regard, the British newspaper The Independent touched on Egypt's endeavour to bridge the gaps between the negotiating parties at the United Nations Climate Conference, with the conclusion of the first week of the climate summit, referring to the statements of the Minister of Environment, Yasmin Fawad, to the Associated Press, in which she confirmed that the biggest challenge for Egypt as a host country is to convince the commissioners of various issues, including financing countries to adapt to climate change, consensus on losses and damages, and providing financing from industrialized countries to poorer countries that suffer from climate damage. In this context, the Saudi Al-Sharq Bloomberg website focused on the statements of Egyptian Foreign Minister Sami Shoukry, head of COP27, in which he expressed his optimism about the possibility of reaching an agreement this week on losses and damages, which is considered one of the most contentious issues at the climate summit. "I will definitely work to get to that point," Shoukry said in a satisfactory manner. For the first time, the issue of loss and damage, which talks about how developed countries should compensate developing countries for disasters caused by climate change that they had no significant role in causing, was included on the agenda. At the level of initiatives and joint projects undertaken by Egypt on the sidelines of the conference, the SIS report stated that the Greek newspaper Newsbeast focused on the issue of electrical interconnection between Greece and Egypt as a new corridor for the exchange of clean energy between Europe and North Africa, where ADMIE intends to participate and invest in the project. With the Egyptian director of ETC and implementation operator el-Sheikh, as the new interconnection will connect North Africa with Europe via Greece and will provide huge possibilities for the use of renewable energy sources, as it is planned to install a direct current cable with a voltage of 500 kV with a total capacity of up to 3 gigawatts to achieve the maximum absorption of the clean energy that will be produced in Egypt. As for the Russian news website Russia Today, it published a report on the signing of a number of agreements between the fund and a number of developers worth $83 billion in the renewable energy sector, the Minister of Planning, Hala El said, and the Executive Director of the Sovereign Fund of Egypt. For its part, the Belgian TV channel RTBF focused on Belgium's accession to the Intergovernmental Declaration on Youth and Climate, where Federal Climate Minister Zakia Al-Khattabi announced that Belgium joins 34 signatories to the Intergovernmental Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action. The same channel also touched on Belgium joins the offshore wind energy OPEC, along with 8 other countries participating in what is known as the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, GOWA, which aims to encourage the development of offshore wind energy. The information report noted that the Turkish media, specifically the website of TRT Arabic channel, reported the Turkish Minister of Environment, Urban Development and Climate's announcement of his country's candidacy to host the 31st United Nations Climate Change Conference, to be held in 2026. As for the Iranian media, the Al-Alam channel website indicated that the minister, the local administration and the environment in Syria stressed the need for concerted efforts to confront the negative effects of climate change, at a time when the world is witnessing changes and harsh conditions at all levels, which are exacerbated by environmental disasters resulting from climate change, stressing that Syria was and still is committed to international environmental agreements, which has been ratified and put within its policies, priorities and annual plans several measures to reduce the effects of climate change and move towards sustainable development. The information report added that the Asian and Australian media highlighted in their daily follow-up for the 11th day in a row the Climate Summit Conference, COP27, held in Sharm el-Sheikh. Egypt signed 8 contracts with international companies to implement green fuel production projects within the economic zone of the Suez Canal, east of Cairo, with investments amounting to 83 billion, according to the Chinese Xinhua agency. The Singaporean newspaper, The Straits Times, also published a report written by Rachel Kite, Dean of the Fletcher College at Tufts University, in which he mentioned the writer who spent a large part of his career working in international finance at the World Bank and the United Nations, and is now providing public development advice and private funds and examines climate diplomacy with a focus on financing. For promising signs of progress at COP27 are: make the world get rid of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 to stop global warming. Reforming international financial institutions by making a change in how international finance works. Develop more public-private partnerships to accelerate decarbonization and power the clean energy transition. New rules to strengthen carbon markets by issuing a new set of high-integrity carbon credit principles. The Indonesian newspaper Tempo also indicated that the group of finance ministers of the 20 vulnerable countries, B20, consisting of 58 climate-vulnerable economies and the Group of 7, G7, officially launched the Global Shield Against Climate Risks at COP27, an initiative for pre-arranged financial support to be deployed quickly. In times of climate catastrophe, Initial contributions include around €170 million from Germany and more than €40 million from other countries. In a related context, the Indian press reported a statement by the Indian Environment Minister, Bhupinder Yadav, during the COP27 conference, explaining that his country is making strenuous efforts to combat climate change even though it represents less than 4% of cumulative global emissions so far, and that India has responded to the call to increase ambition. In climate goals for 2030, Pakistan also introduced the Pakistan Climate Crisis Charter, highlighting the losses and damages incurred by Pakistan, stressing the urgency of its adoption. While the Australian Climate Council website, concerned with climate affairs, published a report in which experts from the Australian Climate Foundation described the statement of the Minister of Climate Change, Chris Bowen, during the COP27 Climate Summit, that he missed the opportunity to convincingly present Australia's reasons for co-hosting COP31, through the failure of the Australian government to even it is now supporting the creation of a new loss and damage financing facility, a key priority for the Pacific region. The inquiry's report stated that the Arab media coverage of the climate summit held in the Egyptian city of Sharm el-Sheikh for the 11th day in a row was characterized by diversity, with a focus on environmental and technical issues and Egyptian and international climate initiatives. The agreements, concluded by Egypt, on the sidelines of the summit, to develop green fuel and energy projects, renewable energy, with remarkable interest from the Arab media, who indicated that Egypt signed 8 framework agreements during the summit to develop renewable energy projects worth $83 billion, while the Suez Canal Economic Zone announced that its outcome during the summit amounted to 15 green fuel production projects, and that it aims to attract $61 billion over the next 15 to 20 years. This was covered by the Saudi Al-Sheikh TV website, the Emirati Ally News Network, and the Qatari Al-Khalij Al-Jadid website. The Kuwaiti newspaper Al-Anbar reported that the Egyptian foreign minister, chairman of the 27th session of the climate conference, affirmed that the Climate Change Adaptation Fund is a major channel for mobilizing the necessary financing to enhance adaptation measures to climate change in developing countries. Shawkri expressed his appreciation to the donors who support the fund, stressing that their material contributions to enhancing the fund's resources help implement many adaptation projects on the ground and protect communities most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. While the Omani newspaper Al Watan touched on the Global Shield Against Climate Risks initiative launched by the Group of Seven, headed by Germany, and about 60 vulnerable countries on the sidelines of the Conference of the Parties on Climate, COP27, as a new program to help finance the repercussions of global warming. The SIS report focused on African media highlighting the COP27 summit, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh for the 11th day in a row, especially with the near end of the conference, where the initiatives undertaken by many African countries to overcome the repercussions of climate change in the continent dominated the media coverage. Where the Congolese media highlighted the organization of a march officially sponsored by a Congolese official on the sidelines of the COP27 work, to demand that the world make concrete commitments to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as it sees itself as a country that solves the problems of climate change, as a lung for the planet through its extended forests. L'Avenir newspaper, in its African version published in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, dealt with several issues related to the second week of the COP27 summit, including the launch of the Egyptian presidency of the conference and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations FAO of the FAST initiative, which aims to make agri-food systems more sustainable and improve food security in the face of climate change. In terms of Angolan media, the Angolan news agency paid attention to the praise of U.S. President Joe Biden for the performance of the Angolan government in defending the environment within the framework of measures to facilitate adaptation to climate change, focusing on his talk about the partnership between American companies and the government of Angola, which is embodied in an investment worth $2 billion to implement new solar energy projects in Angola. As for the Rwandan media, The New Times focused on the launch of Rwanda's €46 million facility to finance government institutions that are working to implement the Rwanda Climate Action Plan in partnership with Germany, with the aim of attracting more climate financing from investors and development partners looking to be part of it. Green Growth Journey in Rwanda. In South Africa, the editorial of the Business Day newspaper focused on the issue of compensating for losses for developing countries most vulnerable to the risks of climate change, as well as on fulfilling the commitments of the West to provide $100 billion annually to adapt and confront the effects of climatic factors on African countries, as quoted by the South African newspaper, The Star. Reuters agency, a group of rich and developing countries launched a plan to provide rapid financial support to communities affected by climate disasters at the United Nations Climate Summit COP27. In Nigeria, Africa News took note of an open letter signed by 550 groups and individuals, including former UN climate chief Christiana Figueres, in which the signatories and activists called on COP27 delegates to adopt a common definition of climate disinformation and misinformation and work to prevent it. They called on major social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter to work to prevent the circulation of such misleading information. In the end, I thank Jason for your follow-up. We hope to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button, and do not forget to like. We also await your support through the Super Chat and the Thank You feature.